So this is a spot where I definitely think that Negreanu needs to bet. He actually posted on Twitter that he did some studying after this match, and one thing his advisors told him is to bet the turn when you have good hands. And it's true. That said, this is a good spot to make an exploit against players who you think are going to be overly aggressive. But like right here, the only way he's going to win additional money out of Polk is if the river is an 8 or a 6, right? Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little. I'm here today with another hand from the 200-400 heads-up battle between Doug POLK and Daniel NEGREANU. This hand is from the first 200 hands that were played live on PokerGo. Let's get right to it. Here we have Daniel NEGREANU on the button playing about 100 big blinds deep with 6-5 of diamonds. He opens up for a raise, which is perfectly fine in standard. And now Doug POLK 3-bets the 8-6 suited. And you may say, ooh, why would you 3-bet the 8-6 suited? That's not a particularly great hand. Well, it turns out, let's take a look at Doug POLK's preflop strategy here, that 8-6 suited actually should be 3-betting 75% of the time. That's what the 0.75 here means. It should be calling the other 25% of the time. And this is a pretty aggressive strategy from the big blind. Essentially, you're 3-betting with a very strong linear range that also includes a lot of these low, middle connected suited cards for board coverage, meaning that whenever the board comes low cards, you want to make sure you have some nut hands in your range. If you only 3-bet, like let's say a bunch of big high cards, and the board comes 8-6-4, you have almost no nut hands in your range, which is a bit of a problem. By 3-betting a more, well, a wider strategy, but still a linear strategy containing all the best hands, you're going to have better board coverage. So make sure you are using fundamentally sound preflop strategies. If you're not, you're going to be lighting your money on fire. You can get this chart and many more at pokercoaching.com/HUNL so that you never mess up playing preflop and heads up no limit hold'em. It's not all that hard. Here's the strategies. Now, of course, if your opponent uses a very different strategy, like say that they use a lot of limping, or if they raise to 10 big blinds preflop, your strategy should, of course, change. So make sure you are adjusting to whatever the exact scenario you are in. Back to NEGREANU. He has a call for the most part. Looking at the charts, he should be calling in this scenario 93% of the time and 4-betting every once in a while. He does call. Flop comes Jack 7-6. Neat spot. This is a scenario where when Doug POLK is betting, he should be betting using a reasonably big size because hands like aces, kings, queens, ace, jack, etc. really want to charge / extract value from whatever NEGREANU has. So this is a spot where when he is betting, he should be betting pretty big. Compared to a less coordinated board where he can certainly go for a smaller bet size very, very frequently. This is a board where you should be betting a little bit bigger and betting a little bit less often because it is so coordinated. So you can't just continuation bet this flop 100% of the time against someone who is a good, strong poker player. Now, let's take a look here at Doug POLK's flop strategy. As you see, a big bet's used decently often. Small bet's still used decently often, but 25% checking, which lines up with what I said. Notice this 8-6 suited here is a hand that does a ton of checking. And you may say, why does that hand do a lot of checking? Because it's very clearly a marginal made hand. It turns out the hands that could conceivably win at the showdown if it checks down, or can call one bet and still be in fine shape, very much prefer checking. So in this scenario, on Jack 7-6, that's going to be a lot of hands containing a 6 with a low kicker, 7 with a low kicker, perhaps under pairs, like we see 10s and 9s doing some checking. We see some ace highs doing a lot of checking. That said, again, this is one of these spots where out of position, you're going to find that a mixed strategy where you're basically taking every action with every hand some portion of the time is what the GTO strategy does. Some people look at this and try to justify like doing whatever they want because like, oh, look, you can bet or you can check. And hey, it even bets big 5% of the time, so you can do whatever you want. But it's not exactly how it works. This is the difficulty when trying to look at a solver strategy and actually implement it. Because let's say you always check 8-6 suited here, or the vast majority of the time you check 8-6 suited. Now everything else gets thrown off a little bit, and that will change the whole rest of the strategy. So anyway, this is a spot where I think betting or checking is fine for Doug POLK. He does like to check. Over to NEGREANU now with a 6-5 suited. Interesting scenario. What would you do with 6-5 suited here? Actually, take a second, think about it, pause the video, and write what you would do with a 6-5 suited in this scenario. Would you check? Would you bet it small? Or would you bet it big? Do it. Go for it. Okay. This is a spot where I think you can realistically go either way. Let's take a look at the GTO strategy here for NEGREANU. Take a look at the 6-5 suited. It mostly checks, and that's because it's actually a pretty similar hand to what Doug POLK has, right? Like when he's checking, he has a lot of these medium pairs and bottom pairs, and you don't really want to be betting into that range. So it turns out this particular hand does not do very much betting. When you are betting, typically you're betting a small size because you're essentially trying to get protection / extract value. Notice this is a spot where NEGREANU should not actually be betting all that often. He also uses a pretty big bet size a decent amount of the time in this scenario too. If you take a look at the hands that he is betting big, these are the hands that are almost certainly best, that are just trying to protect, plus some bluffs, right? Like ace-jack, very clearly, jack-7, jack-6, 7-6, right? Notice he does not need to bet big with the sets because those are just like super nuts. And then he's just betting with a smattering of bluffs, right? So pretty neat to see. This time he does go for a small bet. It seemed like NEGREANU was using a lot of small bets in this heads-up match across the board, especially in rather big pots, which could be fine, could be optimistic. This is a spot, though, where you will see that when someone 3-bets pre-flop and then checks the flop, usually they have a very reasonable condensed range. I mean, as you can see here, right? Like, go back to what POLK is checking on the flop. It's like some aces, some ace-king, which is okay, some ace-queen, which is okay, right? Then we have some sporadic jacks are checking, right? You really don't want to be betting into jacks. We have a bunch of 7s checking. We have a bunch of 6s checking. This is a spot where you do have to be a little bit cautious just betting blindly, because if POLK is structuring his range well, which I have to presume he is, Doug POLK is a very, very world-class heads-up player, you can't get away with just betting when check to, like you perhaps can against weaker players. Doug POLK has an easy call here with his bottom pair, turns the queen of diamonds. POLK checks, and now NEGREANU has to decide if he wants to value bet or get very tricky and trappy. And this is something NEGREANU did very frequently in this match. He checked behind on the turn with very, very premium hands. I actually don't like checking behind in this scenario at all, because on the turn, his hand is highly susceptible to being outdrawn. Notice here if he does have 7-6, he's betting it sometimes and checking it sometimes. The times he's betting it, though, is when it is a flush. Notice he also should be betting if he has sets, right? All of these low ace-x suiteds are flushes and king-x suiteds are flushes. He should be betting the vast majority of his flushes in this scenario because he wants to get money in the pot, right? When you have the super nuts, which this hand is a super nuts, you're happy getting all of your money and heads up with it, you really, 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 really want to play a big pot. And this is also a pretty dicey spot because if it goes check, check, and the river's a diamond, NEGREANU's hand went from being a very, very premium hand to a substantially weaker hand, right? And even if it's not a diamond, there's no guarantee POLK's going to bluff. If POLK's sitting here with just like, jack 10 or 8-7 or 8-6, he's just going to check the river and you're not going to win any money. So this is a spot where I definitely think that NEGREANU needs to bet. He actually posted on Twitter that he did some studying after this match, and one thing his advisors told him is to bet the turn when you have good hands. And it's true. That said, this is a good spot to make an exploit against players who you think are going to be overly aggressive. But like right here, the only way he's going to win additional money out of POLK is if the river is an 8 or a 6, right? Because what's going to happen is POLK's just going to let it go check, check on the turn. He's probably going to check fold to a river bet because usually it's not going to run out so great, and that's okay. So it's not like he's maximally exploiting POLK here at all. And I mean, every once in a while he is going to get lucky and get an 8 or a 6, and he's going to win a bigger pot, but it's kind of rare. Not this time, though. River is the 8. Doug POLK now goes for the medium-sized value bet. Let's take a look at what the solver recommends here. As you see, 8-6 is betting sometimes, not always. It is worth noting that a lot of the 8-6 that is betting here is actually the 8-6 of diamonds. Now, I know NEGREANU has the 6 of diamonds here, but the solver image is going to be a little bit convoluted because in this scenario, some 8-6s are flushes, which are doing a lot of bigger betting, right? And some 8-6s are 2 pair. And some of the 2 pair here actually does check. I want to make that very, very clear. Notice the small size, 30% pot, is actually rarely used with the 8-6. Usually it's going a little bit bigger because when 8-6 is betting, it's trying to get called by a queen or a jack, right? And a queen or a jack is probably going to call a bigger bet, like 2/3 pot. So this is a scenario where POLK certainly does not have to bet. This very easily could just be a check and call. You may say, really, check, call, 2 pair here? It's a neat spot. It's a weird scenario where, It's very easy for Negreanu to be sitting here with better 2-pair or a straight or a flush. Although, to be fair, the flush should likely bet the turn. So I certainly don't fault Polk for value betting this. But now Negreanu puts in the raise, a big raise. Notice 6-5 of diamonds actually does not even raise every time in this spot, which is also kind of cool. Turns out, whenever you have a marginal made hand, you have to be a little bit cautious. And I mean, this certainly is a strong hand, but it's like a strong marginal made hand. It's kind of on the cusp of being a premium hand or a marginal made hand. We discuss hand strengths a ton at pokercoaching.com, by the way. If you have not checked out Poker Coaching yet, go to pokercoaching.com/free to give it a try. And we have homework that we do every single month where I ask people how to play their entire range on every betting round in an implementable spot or an implementable manner. Not just, don't copy the solver, but try to actually show as you would play it for the most part in game. And we're always categorizing our hands between premium made hands, which are trying to get a lot of money in, draws, which you're often being aggressive with to balance out the premium hands, marginal made hands that are probably good but don't really want to play for all the money, and junk, which is bad, right? And it turns out this 7-6 suit or 6-5 suited flush is somewhere on the cusp between a premium hand and a marginal hand, which is why it actually gets called some portion of the time. And just like Doug POLK's 8-6, even though it's pretty good, it's also not exactly a premium hand. So it's kind of a bizarre scenario, right? So anyway, Negreanu does put in the raise. Back over to Polk, and now we're actually in this weird corner case. I know you can't even really see what is happening here, but it says Doug POLK raises all in sometimes and calls the rest. The times he's raising all in is when he has a flush, which obviously he does not have this time. The times he's calling the all in are when... the times he's calling is when he does not have a flush, when he has 2-pair. So this is a pretty unavoidable spot. It's definitely a bad spot for him to be in, but he has to find a call. Notice Doug POLK is also jamming with like jacks for top set. Jack 10 jams. Is Jack 10 a flush? No, Jack 10 is a bluff jam sometimes. That's kind of cool to see, right? Pretty bizarre. 10-9. 10-9 is a straight. That opts to jam as well. Maybe this is all flushes. It could be all flushes. So anyway, pretty neat to see. Really not a ton of folding here. I mean, folding half the time, of course, which is a decent amount, but cool to see that he is still getting it in some portion of time. Like you see right here, 10-9 offsuit. When he does have it, this tiny sliver of the time. I know it's a very tiny sliver. I wanted to make sure you could see how rare we're in this scenario, by the way. But this tiny sliver actually does rip it in with the 10-9 offsuit. So it's a spot where I think the solver may... I want to make it clear. I know I'm getting kind of lost in my thought process here. This is an easy call for Doug POLK. Fine. Let's not discuss this scenario. Nice, easy, nothing to say about that. What's happening here, though, is that we're actually not playing by the solver anymore to some extent because Negreanu checked back the turn with the flush, right? So it's important to recognize when your opponent takes a line that's way off of the solver, looking at the solver to try to extrapolate what you should do from that point on doesn't really apply, right? Because when it goes check, check on the turn, solver assumes Negreanu has almost no flushes. So if Negreanu has almost no flushes, then a set and a straight are basically the nuts, right? But when Negreanu does have flushes, now... for all I know, this 8-6 could just be a fold when you get raised on the river, right? Because the solver's assuming Negreanu doesn't actually have a ton of flushes here. So definitely a neat scenario where you want to make sure you are considering your opponent's strategies. If you wanted to spend substantially more time in the solver, you can go through and do what's referred to as node locking and say that Negreanu has a lot of flushes on the turn, in which case I can guarantee you the solver's going to be way more passive on the river in Doug POLK's spot, probably just opting to check call. But yeah, it's a very neat scenario, right? Where we both have pretty strong hands, but from a GTO point of view, neither player really wants to play a gigantic pot. So certainly a cool spot and definitely worth taking a look at. Hope you enjoyed this hand. If you did, click like and click subscribe. I would appreciate it. Like I said, if you want a lot more content like this, check out pokercoaching.com/free. We have some very, very world-class coaches who use GTO solvers, Pio solver and Munker solver on a very regular basis. We have Michael Acevedo. He wrote the book Modern Poker Theory. Also Matt Affleck and Faraz Jaka do a lot of solver work at Poker Coaching too. So if you want more GTO strategies, check out pokercoaching.com/free. Hope you have a great day. Hope you enjoy yourself. Thanks for being here, and I will talk to you next time.